Let's talk to Will Kingston, political commentator, host of the Fire at Will podcast. Will, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Yes, sadly, I think that the King shares a lot of the Sadiq Khan-style progressive woke views, but he's just slightly more limited in what he can actually say. But there's that sympathy there, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think there is. And I mean, sometimes, you know, they just miss the point slightly, you know, and I get that there are things that he needs to sound off about, but he's also in a very powerful position. And even just one or two sentences about, you know, how dangerous it is to encourage extremism, or how dangerous it is to allow people into this country who may wish to do us harm. You know, it wouldn't go amiss if he said something like that, and it wouldn't be in any way the wrong thing to say, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of these leaders, I include the King, I include most politicians, they still think they're living in the 80s or 90s where this sort of spin works, where you can say particular types of words and people don't think critically about it. Whereas now when someone hears a line like that, they go, well, why aren't you actually getting to the real issue? People are much more discerning. They can cut through the BS in the modern media environment in a way that they didn't used to be able to. Yeah,
I think partly because there's a lot of different types of commentary now going on, you know, not least there's channels like ours, there's people on social media, you know, who are very powerful, who've got big followings, and who people just, you know, people don't watch what you might call traditional mainstream programs anymore. They just don't. And so they're not buying into it, you know. And when you see some of the nonsense that's parroted by some of the sort of the big news shows, you just think, you know, that is absolutely not what is going on. That is absolutely not what people think. You know, when you see some of the interviews that take place, and you go, you know, the interviewers are kind of gobsmacked by what they see and what they hear, and you just kind of go. I mean, I was listening to somebody the other day on a rival channel who was describing somebody shoplifting, and said, oh yeah, I saw this very unfortunate young slim man who didn't look terribly healthy running in at speed to a Sainsbury's and stealing a load of baby formula and running out again, and said, you know, obviously he needed it for his family. And somebody rang in and went, actually no, baby formula is really, really valuable because it's very expensive, so a lot of people nick it and sell it to buy drugs, because, you know, a lot of ordinary people can't afford it. It's £15–20 a bottle. And this person was like, the person whose show it was like completely gobsmacked that was the reality, because, you know, she was under the impression that this poor guy was stealing because he had a baby, and it never occurred to her that he might be a junkie, even though he obviously looked like one.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? It just goes to show as well, there is still, despite what we just said around the fragmentation of media, a mainstream media class that is predominantly that liberal elite that lives in kind of parts of Islington or has a lot of money from family, which means that they can afford to do, you know, sorts of particular types of media jobs. And they don't actually bother to go out and see the rest of the UK. So there is still that disconnect as well.
Yeah, absolutely right. Let's have a look at what the Tories have been saying. I mean, they've got nothing really to shout about at the moment, but they did do a video at the weekend which at least cheered me up. And this is their celebration of 1 year of this Labour government.
Have no doubt that we will rebuild Britain with wealth created in every community.
I am announcing an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. This budget raises taxes by £40 billion.
Inflation jumps more than forecast to its highest rate in over a year, prompting investors to bet against more rate cuts from the Bank of England.
Secure borders.
The number of migrants crossing the Channel to the UK in small boats in the first half of this year has risen by more than 40% compared with the same period last year.
Safer streets.
Today in England and Wales, more than 1,000 prisoners are expected to be released under the UK government's early release scheme, having served only 40% of their sentences.
Our work is urgent, and we begin it today. Thank you very much.
Have you lost control of your MPs, Prime Minister?
That's because he stumbled as he came out of Parliament number 10 on Wednesday. And that other clip from, you know, our work is urgent and we start today, that was day one, right, when he looked about 30 years younger than he does now. And
really does, doesn't he?
And none of that included, I mean, also David Lammy, who we've been watching this morning as well, telling us all how he's done such a great job this year. Got this from Susan, who says, morning, Mike, great show as usual. I read that David Lammy visited Syria to re-establish ties, and the UK government giving them £94.5 million. You couldn't make it up. That's another one of his greatest hits. You know, he's suddenly meeting up with a bloke, and I know Donald Trump did it as well. but we're meeting up with this guy from Syria who's the former leader of an Al-Qaeda based organisation, which is now becoming more and more Islamic as time goes on. You know, they got rid of Bashar al-Assad, and now they've got this kind of formerly bloodthirsty terrorist in charge. Oh, and guess what they're doing now? They're clamping down on women walking around without hijabs on. They're making it more and more difficult for people to behave in a way which is, in their words, un-Islamic. And suddenly we're giving them nearly 100 million quid.
Yeah, well, somehow the Labor Party and the left in this country still see that Islamic voting base as an oppressed class, and so they give them a pass. On that ad, I think it's really interesting, Mike, because I don't think the Conservatives have woken up to the new reality that they find themselves in, with a party that is outflanking them on the right, as well as having to attack the incumbent government on the left. Like, that could just as easily be an ad for reform, and most people would read it as an ad for reform, because most of those problems that were in that ad, people equate them with the Conservatives just as much as they equate them with the Labor Party. So the thing which the Conservatives have to deal with incredibly quickly, and it'll have to be a lot quicker than Kemi Badenoch saying, I'm taking my time, I'm going to do things in a measured, considered way, because frankly for her, she doesn't have the time to do that anymore. Right. They've got to say, not just this Labor government is rubbish, fine, we know that. They've got to say, well, why should we give you guys another chance when you were such a big part of the problem in the first place? Yeah. And they still haven't been able to work out a lane to be able to say that. And that's why I think the conversation around the Conservatives being at existential risk in this country is very, very real.
Yeah, and I've had that conversation with several Tory MPs, and I ask them that question whenever they come on usually now. Mel Stride was doing the rounds yesterday, and he was talking about how, you know, we're having to rebuild, we understand that we got it wrong, we made mistakes, blah, blah, blah. That's all fine. But every time there's a new poll, the Tories seem to be further and further away, you know, from reality. There's one out that came out yesterday sort of overnight, Times Online. It's another one from the More in Common people, and it's got the Reform Party with 290 seats, Labour 126, Conservatives 81, Lib Dems 73. I mean, it's really, really damaging for the Tories. It looks as though they are, you know, lucky if they can come in third.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I think there is a lane for them in modern British politics, and it is around fiscal responsibility. So you mentioning the wealth tax before, it's very obvious that this government doesn't have the ability to be able to be fiscally responsible, to cut down on spending, which is what we need to do. It certainly doesn't have the ability to be able to grow the economy, which not so long ago was the raison d'etre of this government. Yeah. So they're just going to keep raising taxes. That's the only other lever they've got. And by the way, they've run out of road there. You cannot keep raising taxes and expect to keep getting the same amount of tax revenue in return.
Well, it doesn't work like that, does it? It just simply doesn't work like that. And as we've seen from this this poll that's been done by Visual Capitalists in association with Henley and Partners, which is a very good polling company, and Harry Cole's tweeted this out already. You know, thousands and thousands of people are simply picking up and leaving the UK. You know, and you can't disavow that and say it doesn't matter, because it's a huge amount of tax revenue that's disappearing with them.
Yeah, the extraordinary thing is, given that Labor has so much sympathy for the luxury beliefs of the liberal elite class, they fail to understand two really critical things about rich people, which is A, they've got very good accountants, and B, that they can move around if the circumstances that they're in change. They've got the ability to do so. It's the working class, it's the poor people, and it's even kind of the up to the middle class that have less flexibility. So they just go, oh, well, you know, I'm sure that the rich will suck it up, as opposed to actually being smart with their money. But the one other thing I'd say on that Conservative dilemma is that I don't think reforms so far have shown enough of an appetite to actually have any sort of fiscally responsible approach to some of these problems. I think some of their economics sounds pretty populist, as opposed to actually being responsible in the way we need it to be. So the angle, the angle for the Conservatives is obviously we are the fiscally responsible party in a time when the UK economy is rapidly heading towards the cliff, and I don't think that's overstating it. But the problem with that, Mike, is in an age in Western politics where, to be honest, most people are just happy to see more money go on the country credit card. Right. You need to have incredibly persuasive, good politicians who can tell in simple terms why it is important to save money, why tough choices need to be made, and as a result of that, why even when there's going to be losers in the economy, it's best for people overall if you make those hard choices. But I can't see enough of that type of talent in the Conservative Party to make that argument.
also the problem is that the Tories' argument about fiscal responsibility will always fall down because they were the ones that brought us here in the first place. You know, we had much higher taxes under the Tories than we'd ever had before since the Second World War. They were the ones that brought those taxes in. They say it was because of austerity. They say it was because of the fact that COVID happened. You know, all well and good. But, you know, unfortunately, also under them, the state got bigger. You know, there were more civil servants hired. They're still there. Nobody's got rid of them. You know, whenever they talk about, you know, we're having to make tough choices, we're going to have to save money. We'll sack some of the people in the civil service, reduce the size of the state. That's what real people want in this country. They don't want money spent on all sorts of civil servants and people who've got jobs for life, who sit around doing it from home. That's not any longer going to be acceptable to anyone. And that's why I think Reform have got that, you know, that system. You know, you might not think it's as believable as it should be, but, you know, they've got the right idea. They want to reduce the size of the state. They don't want to keep increasing it and then cutting benefits.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. That makes entire sense. This is the Gordian knot for the Conservatives, and I think they're just hoping their strategy is, well, give it enough time and people will forget about that 14-year period, and I'm not sure that that's going to be successful for them. They need to do something radical to reframe their brand, whether that is openly coming out and just laying into Johnson, Cameron, that whole 14-year period and say these guys were useless, we disavow them from the Conservative Party, they weren't Conservatives, whether it's a full-on rebrand in some way. They need to do something to break that chain, because at the moment people can say you guys are just as bad or you guys started the problems. And I don't think just say, okay, well, in 3 years' time, people will have forgotten about that period is sufficient. I don't think it's a good enough strategy for them.
No, I don't think it is. Good to talk to you. Will Kingston, thanks very much indeed. Political commentator and host of the Fire at Will podcast. The new poll puts Reform on 290 seats.